Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Radboud Reflects live stream with Professor Souha Kanj, who will be presented with an honorary doctorate of the Radboud University tomorrow. Over the course of the next hour, you can listen to and participate in an interview with Professor Kanj, in which we will ask her about the fight against antibiotic resistance, but also about the situation in Lebanon and the position of women in medical science. You can send in your own questions via menti.com using the code 278589. This information is listed below the stream in the video description, but I'll also repeat it once we'll start taking your questions. First, however, I would like to give the word to Professor Han van Krieken, who is rector of the Radboud University, to properly introduce Professor Souha Kanj. Han, the floor is yours.
Welcome to this online meeting hosted by Radboud Reflects. I'm very proud to introduce to you Professor Souha Kanj. Souha Kanj is Professor of Medicine and Head of the Division of Infectious Diseases at the American University Medical Center of Beirut in Lebanon. She also holds a position of Consulting Professor at Duke University Medical Center, Durham, North Carolina, USA. She is a charismatic, outstanding physician in the field of infectious diseases and a role model for all doctors in the world, but especially for medical specialists in infectious diseases in the Middle East. I'm very proud to announce to you that on October 15, she will receive an honorary doctorate at Radboud University. This will, however, due to the corona crisis, not be a live meeting, but an online one that can be viewed by all of you, and I invite you to do that. But for now, I'm very happy to introduce to you Professor Souha Kanj, with my warmest regards.
Welcome, welcome, Professor. We are honored to have you with us tonight. I hope you're doing fine tonight.
Thank you very much, Frank. It's really an honor to be with you tonight, and I'd like to thank Rector Krieger for his really very nice introductory remarks. It's a true honor to become a member of the Radboud family. You have an outstanding university, and I'm humbled by this honorary doctorate degree.
Well, you are most welcome. Again, the honor is all ours. If I may, the rectorate told us that you are the head of the Infectious Diseases Department at the American University of Beirut Medical Center. So what is it that you and your colleagues do? Are you like the American CDC? I'm curious to know more.
Yes. So the American University of Beirut is a 150-year-old university. It's one of the oldest universities in the Arab countries. And as the name indicates, this was established as a very strong collaboration between the American people and the Lebanese people. And this university operates as per the American standards in terms of the practice of medicine, the research, all the rules that guide our university are rules that guide American universities. And so for many, many years, up until a few years ago, all the presidents of the American University were of the American University of Beirut were American. Now we have a Lebanese American president, but all the others that preceded him were Americans. We continue to have an active New York office, and we're Joint Commission accredited hospital. And as I said, truly all the training program, etc., are per American standards. We recently received ACGME accreditations for our residency program, which is really an outstanding achievement. This is only the second outside the U.S. That has ACGME accreditation.
Okay, well, thank you. It's a very international nature of the university,
right?
So you are the head of the Infectious Diseases Department in particular,
right?
So I take it you study infectious diseases.
Right. So I'm the head of the Infectious Diseases Division, which is part of the Department of Internal Medicine. And so we study, we teach, we do research in infectious diseases, all kinds, the same kinds that are seen internationally, as well as the endemic diseases that are of particular concern in the Middle East and Arab region.
Mm-hmm. And considering the current pandemic that is going on, has your research focus shifted towards this novel coronavirus, or is that not possible at this short term?
No, actually, it is possible, although we're clinically, we've been very, very busy with a large number of infected patients. And so most of our time has been spent taking care of patients. And so this has taken us a bit away from the other research projects that we've been doing. But we try also to focus on some COVID-related research, whether looking at the epidemiology of COVID infection in the country. We've submitted several research proposals, for example, looking at convalescent plasma as a treatment for severe COVID patients. We're looking at artificial intelligence, for example, for the diagnosis of images on CT scan for patients with COVID-19, and various virological projects in collaboration with other researchers in the medical center.
Excellent. Could I ask you a little bit more about the application of AI for the diagnosis of diseases?
Yes. So as you probably have heard, a lot of the patients who have COVID-19, they present with some typical imaging on CT scan. And so with researchers from the engineering department, we have submitted a grant to look at whether artificial intelligence can, by screening the CT scan imaging, they can give a diagnosis of findings typical of COVID-19, for example, without the help of a radiologist. As you might imagine, with the COVID pandemic, clinicians in all specialties, particularly infectious diseases, pulmonary critical care, radiologists, they're really overwhelmed with the amount of work they have to do. So we're hoping that by feeding an artificial intelligence program, you can have that read the CT scan imaging and tell you, for example, this is classic for COVID, etc., without the absolute need for a radiologist to read that. So this is still in the beginning. We're still actually submitting for IRB approval. As for every research project in our institution, we need to get IRB approval. So it's still, I would say, in its infancy, but we're hopeful that we can have some meaningful results.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I would like to move on to a topic that is not directly connected to what we've discussed just now, at least not to the current coronavirus pandemic. But it's something that's mentioned a lot in relation to your research, which is the antimicrobial or antibiotic resistance.
Right.
So I'm curious to know, like in general or abstract terms, what is this? Because we know that when people get sick, we used to prescribe, or we still prescribe, antibiotics. But now you say there's a certain resistance coming up to antibiotics.
Right. Yeah. So, Frank, I think this is a problem that I think everyone should be aware of. I mean, in the past, we used to talk about antimicrobial resistance only in the medical field, to medical students, staff, employees of hospital. But I think in now 2020, every human should be aware of the problem of antibiotic resistance, because this is not something that's just limited to the hospital setting. Nowadays, we are seeing every single bacterium, whether the type of bacteria that cause community infections or the bacteria that cause hospital infections, all of them have managed to develop resistance not only to the what we call narrow spectrum antibiotics, but even to what we call the broad spectrum antibiotics. So we classify antibiotic into their spectrum of activity. The narrow are the ones that work on, some few types of bacteria. The large spectrum are the ones that tend to work on a very large number and kinds of bacteria. So now we are facing and struggling in all parts of the world with bacteria that have become what we call extremely drug resistant, or in some cases, pan-drug resistant, which means that you are faced with a patient who has an infection and none of the available antibiotics can cure the infection. So now where we are faced with patients with complex problems, cancer, they're receiving treatment for cancer, major surgery, transplants. You have a very successful surgery and treatment, and then the patients end up dying from an infection because they acquire a resistant bacteria. And so that's why if you look at the international societies, infectious diseases societies, the European, the American, the international, WHO, the CDC, the European CDC, all these organizations have really sent the alarm that we have reached a point where everyone should make an effort to curtail the problem of antimicrobial resistance.
Okay,
and
so
that is,
yeah, mm-hmm.
yeah, please go ahead.
So this leads into the question. So if we can apparently do something to curtail it, so how does it arise in the first place? Is it through our actions that it arises?
Right. So it arises through the actions of physicians who prescribe antibiotics haphazardly for every fever, for every cough. Some clinicians prescribe antibiotics for viral infections that do not require antibiotics. The patients have a major role to play because they don't take their antibiotics the way they're supposed to, the right time, the right dose, the right duration. But also, we can't ignore the fact that there is a lot of consumption of antibiotics, not only in human medicine. There is consumption of antibiotic in veterinary medicine, in agriculture, in farming, and that is also playing a major role in selecting for resistance. And that is why now major organizations are speaking about what we call a One Health approach, which means that if you want to really tackle the problem of antimicrobial resistance, you need to look not only at the human use, but also at the farming, agriculture, environment, and veterinary medicine use, because all these are playing a major role in selecting for resistance.
Mm-hmm. And so would the advice be to basically scale down use of antibiotics overall? I guess that's the main thing that needs to be done? Yeah.
Well, I think in human medicine and in treatment of infectious diseases, now we use the term antimicrobial stewardship, which means that you need to be very careful about how to use the antibiotics. For example, if you have a bacterium that responds to a narrow spectrum antibiotic, there's no need to use, if you call it the big gun or the large spectrum antibiotic. The duration, you don't need to give 14 days for every infection. You can bring it down to 5 days, for example. So antimicrobial stewardship in the practice of antibiotic in humans is now become a part of the quality control for every hospital to control the antimicrobial resistance. But also in agriculture and farming animal, for example, you cannot be using broad spectrum antibiotics that are used to treat humans. So for example, I'm going to give an example of colistin, which is a drug that is something we use as a last resort in our very tough to treat bacteria in the intensive care unit. It has been used in farming animal and agriculture. So for example, in China, they discovered that recently they had bacteria resistant even to colistin in the agriculture and farming animals. So immediately they put a ban on the use of this drug in anything outside the human practice. So I think everyone can play a role, whether clinicians, whether people working in agriculture, in farming, in veterinary medicine, all of them have responsibility towards proper practices of antibiotics.
We actually have a question from Heiman Wertheim, who is a professor in clinical microbiology at the Radboud Center for Infectious Diseases. And his question is about exactly this point, about solutions for this antimicrobial resistance. So I'll give the floor to Professor Heiman Wertheim.
Good evening. My name is Heiman Wertheim. I'm a medical microbiologist and head of the Department of Medical Microbiology at the Radboud University Medical Center and chair for the Radboud UMC Center for Infectious Disease. I work very closely with Souha at the International Society of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy, ISAC, where we work together on tackling AMR on a global level, but it's a complicated task. It's a wicked issue, as we say, a wicked problem. And I'm wondering, Souha, is there something scalable, being either expensive or very cheap, that we can do that's going to be disruptive and actually make a change? For now, we've been doing this for many, many years. And I'm really wondering, is there something that we're actually not doing that we should be doing and which is actually scalable and will make the change that we need? Thank you.
Thank you, my dear friend Heiman. We go back to many years ago where we, as Heiman mentioned, we've worked together in ISAC, the International Society of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy. And I think really the antimicrobial resistance problem now has reached a level where it really requires global actions to have an impact. I think for many years we have seen work done either locally, regionally, but we've not seen a lot of work done at the global level. And for that to happen, I think we need many factors to help us achieve this. We still don't have very good surveillance data on antimicrobial resistance from many, many parts of the world. And so up until recently, for example, in the Arab countries, which is the region where I work in right now, we had no data, no regional data to show what's the scale, what is the resistance, and how should we tackle it. So large surveillance studies done at the global level are very important. I think rapid diagnostic laboratory methods are very much needed because up until now in many, many centers and many countries, either cultures are not taken, or if they're taken many days before we have final results, which means the physicians feel that they have to keep the very broad spectrum antibiotic for a long time. I think we need to have more money put into development of new technology as well as new antibiotics, because as I mentioned at the beginning, we continue to struggle with bacteria that are killing our sickest patients after successful transplantation and surgeries and chemotherapy because of resistance. And very important, the international collaboration, because I think ISAC has been a very nice model of how you can have collaboration from all over the world. For example, Infectious Disease Society of America, you have a lot of collaboration from within America. In the European organizations, you have a lot of collaboration within the European countries. But the ISAC is a nice example of international collaboration where you have representation from all over the globe. And I think by putting all these efforts together, this is when we're going to start to see an impact. But also, very importantly, I think we need to educate the public. Because in my opinion, as much as you educate the physicians and the students and the healthcare providers, if you don't educate the public about the seriousness of antimicrobial resistance. If you don't give them antibiotic for their fever and cough, they're going to leave your office and go seek another opinion because they feel that how come I had fever and cough and this doctor did not prescribe me antibiotics. So I think it's multifaceted, and if we want to achieve an impact, we have to work on all these factors that I've mentioned at the same time.
Yeah, so you mentioned a global effort in increasing education for all those involved. And you mentioned the One Health approach and antimicrobial stewardship. But you also mentioned something that is reflected in some of the questions that are coming in via the Mentimeter website. Again, the link to that website and where you can post your questions is in the description below. So go to menti.com and use code 278589. It's currently on screen. Excellent. And some of those questions, they are about these new therapies, because many people or multiple people have asked about bacteriophages. They've heard that maybe these can be a sort of a new style solution to antibiotic resistance. Is there something you can say about that?
Yes, actually, bacteriophages was an area of research that I have become very interested in, and I've actually, if it wasn't for the COVID pandemic, it was a new line of research that we were supposed to start at my medical center in collaboration with the microbiologist and immunologist. So bacteriophages are very, very old therapies. These are viruses that eat up the bacteria, and these are things that were discovered many years ago in Tbilisi at an institute called Eliava Institute, and it was during the wars where they had a lot of injured and wounds. They used bacteriophages and they found that they were effective. And then with the discovery of the very potent antibiotics, people neglected bacteriophages until a few years ago when they started to see these extremely drug, and as I mentioned, sometimes pan-drug resistant bacteria, where some investigators renewed interest in bacteriophages. So there are a couple of centers in the US, for example, University of California in San Diego is one of them. Texas University is another one of them. And few centers in Europe renewed interest in bacteriophages. And one of the advantages of these therapies is that they treat bacteria on biofilms. So in lay terms, when you have some bacterial infections on a foreign body, whether you have a prosthesis or a catheter, the bacteria forms a biofilm to protect itself. So it is thought from some case series and case reports that the bacteriophages are able to break those biofilms and allow the eradication of infection. So I think I would say that so far there are some promising early results, but it's still too early to judge if this is going to become at any point a standard therapy. But I can tell you that for some very tough to treat infections, it is something that has been tried, and there are a few publications. And as I mentioned, if it wasn't for COVID, we were about to initiate the project in our center as well.
That's so interesting. So just for the people at home and for me, this is not just another antibiotic cure, right?
No.
So this is not something that bacteria can then also grow resistant against, or is it?
So there is some data suggesting that the likelihood that the bacteria will grow resistant to bacteriophages is very, 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 very low if it does exist at all.
Because it's sort of a mechanical attack that they
right.
But for
yes, yeah. But also these bacteriophages, they are not available to treat all kinds of bacteria. So in the bacteriophage centers, what you do is you send them the bacterium, and then they engineer a bacteriophage that is directed against the specific bacterium. So it's a complex thing. It's not something that anyone can do. It has to be in a laboratory that has had some experience with such work.
Thank you. I have one final question from the audience about antimicrobial resistance. Someone asks about the role of the pharmaceutical companies in the fight against resistance. Do you see them as having a positive or a negative effect right now in the global struggle against resistance?
Yes. So I think, well, let me answer in two different parts. The first, I think pharmaceutical companies definitely have a positive role because they are the ones who are still investing in bringing new antibiotics to the market. And I can tell you that a lot of companies have abandoned to work with antibiotics because they feel that the revenues from these antibiotics are not similar to the profit that they can make from other drugs. Because, for example, if you take a drug for hypertension or diabetes, the patient will take the drug forever, throughout their life. For infections, they take the drug for 1 week, 2 weeks. And then a few years after they've spent so much money to bring an antibiotic to the market, the bacteria starts developing resistance. And so the profitability of antibiotic has decreased over the years. And that's why a lot of the companies have abandoned. And I salute the companies that continue to bring new antibiotics to the market to help us deal with such patients. But also the pharmaceutical companies can have a negative role to play depending on how they use their promotion. So, and that's why in companies where there are very rigorous rules, there are very much restrictions about what a pharmaceutical company can advertise in scientific meetings, etc. But in other countries, the rules are not as strict, where people working in the company can come to the clinicians and say, we have this new antibiotic, it's the best, you should use it on all your patients, etc. So again, it really depends on where, in which country, and what are the guiding rules. I think in many developing countries now there are very, very strict guiding rules for promotional activities from pharmaceutical companies. I hope that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. I think it does. Thank you very much for the role you play in the global fight against antibiotic or antimicrobial resistance. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to the next topic, which concerns where you are right now in Lebanon. So there's a very, let's say, politically unstable situation in the region and maybe in Lebanon. There's a question about another Radboud University scholar, Nora Stel, who is a conflict scholar at the Radboud University Political Science Department. And she has a question on refugees and public health in Lebanon. So Nora, the floor is yours.
Dear Professor Kanj, congratulations on your honorary doctorate at Radboud University. I admire the groundbreaking work that you do under no doubt sometimes very challenging circumstances. My name is Nora Stel. I'm assistant professor in conflict studies at Radboud University's Political Science Department. For my research, I've worked in and on Lebanon quite a lot, specifically focusing on the country's engagement with various refugee crises. And it's a real privilege to have the opportunity to ask you a question related to this. I would be grateful to hear your thoughts on how to best ensure refugee populations' access to public health. With Lebanon hosting the largest number of refugees per capita in the world, and among many other predicaments now facing the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm sure that your own experience and vision can shed some light on the best practices and pitfalls in this regard that we can all learn from. Thank you for your consideration and wishing you a great, unfortunately virtual stay at Radboud University.
Thank you very much, Nora. And I had the pleasure to meet her virtually last week. This is a very important question. And I'd like to start by saying, although this celebration of this honorary doctorate is virtual. I had the pleasure to visit Radboud University in November of 2018, where I spent a full week. And it was a wonderful week interacting with various faculty members and students and trainees. Now, as Dr. Nora mentioned, yes, absolutely. Well, first, it's no secret that we live in the middle of the conflict of the Middle East, and I think that is one of the big challenge that we've had to deal with for the past several decades. Now, yes, the numbers are very correct. Lebanon has the largest refugee population per 1,000 inhabitants. We have around 167 refugee per 1,000 inhabitants, which is the highest in the world. Over the past few years alone, we've received 1.5 million refugees from Syria. This is to add on 475,000 Palestinian refugees. So you can imagine, for a population of 5 million Lebanese, to have a quarter of its population formed of refugees, that's a huge challenge. The problem is these refugees are living in truly suboptimal conditions. The refugee camps are not what you desire. So in terms of health provision, in terms of cleanliness, in terms of management of the trash, in terms of electricity, water supply, all this is really suboptimal. And we've depended very, very heavily on NGOs really to help with the refugee camps. We have 12 Palestinian refugee camps, so that's a lot for a country the size of Lebanon, which is the size of the state of Connecticut, for example. Really, it's a small country. And you can imagine that with the current Lebanese political unrest and the total economic collapse that we've experienced since October of this year, the situation has gotten very, very bad at many levels. Now, luckily, there are some donations and NGOs that have particularly addressed their help, and they've diverted their resources to the refugees. But you can imagine that the challenge remains very, very big.
So those are insane numbers. If you have 167 refugees per 1,000 inhabitants, those are not numbers that I think we are used to, of course, here in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear that there are NGOs coming in to Lebanon to help out with providing healthcare to these refugees. But I can imagine this also has a large effect on the access to healthcare for Lebanese people. Has that been dramatically affected?
Yeah, well, the problem with the Lebanese people, I would say prior to this year, I'm sure you've heard, Frank, that in October 17, we had a major revolution in the country that led to the whole government resigning and the total economic collapse and the inflation, and the banks stopped providing dollars to the Lebanese people. So it's a very, very, very difficult situation. I must say, having lived in the worst days of the civil wars, that was in 1975, it wasn't as bad as it is now. Before October 17, the majority of the Lebanese people got their health either through private insurance or some sought medical care at governmental hospitals, and we have a very large number of governmental hospitals. Now, after the total economic collapse, a lot of the Lebanese have lost their health insurance because the premium became too high for them to afford paying for that. So now we have more than 50% of the Lebanese population without health insurance. So again, a situation that we have not seen, I would say, as long as I've lived. So yes, this is a very, very difficult situation.
So you've also already told us that some of the research that you were about to embark on has been cancelled, basically, because you now have to focus on the effects of the pandemic. I mean, I can imagine This is just one more thing that's dropped on your lap, basically. So how are you still standing?
Well, I think, Frank, well, first, let me give you just an example of how much the Lebanese money devaluated for the past just 6 months. So $1 was equal 1,500 Lebanese lira, October of 2019. Now $1 is 10,000 Lebanese lira. So it's like almost 7-time devaluation. So you can imagine that if you want to purchase laboratory material to do any type of research, the value in dollar has gone up, 5, 6, or 7 times. So at this point, any new research would be inconceivable, because if you want to get all your material from abroad, I think no one can afford doing that anymore. Besides all the money that you have in the bank in dollars, you have no access to that. At the beginning of the revolution, they allowed you to get $500 per week, and then it became $500 per month, and then it became $200 per month, and right now you can't get any dollars out of the bank. So that's why it really, I would say, froze any new research that we were going to embark on. And you asked me, how am I still standing on my feet? I think I try to keep a positive spirit, and I keep telling people around me there will be an end to all this madness. I think, unfortunately, what we're experiencing in Lebanon is a struggle of the superpowers, not because Lebanon is by itself, of concern to all of them, but because geographically we happen to be in the middle of the storm. And I keep hoping that soon some resolution will be reached, and hopefully that will, stop the madness that's going on. But I'm also an optimist. I always try to think positively. Otherwise, I would have not been where I am today with all the things and challenges I've experienced since I started my medical school.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that expose and telling us, or giving us, concrete examples of how tough things are over there. And you say you're a very optimistic person. That is great, of course, because that also means that you probably see or that you have a motivation to look towards solutions for issues.
Yes.
And I know, and you've told us that there's multiple NGOs coming into Lebanon to try to help out, and there's probably other governments that may be involved in some ways. Are there particular issues that you say are currently in the way of solving the most important issues that you're running into? It's like, is there, is there some purpose or a cry that you want to give out and say, like, hey, we need to fix this. This is a very urgent issue.
I think if I have to give a cry, I think our politicians are very, very corrupt. Someone needs to take care of them to save the country. I think if you look at the history of what happened to Lebanon over the past decades, and the fact that our corrupt politicians have been able to remain in office and to control the resources of the country and not being held accountable for what they've done, someone needs to put these people in jail. I think that will be part of the solution.
All right. So do you find that in your collaboration with NGOs, if you directly collaborate with NGOs, or do you find that in such collaborations, government is actively working against the purposes that you try to achieve?
No, I think government has not played much a role in terms of NGOs help. So, for example, Médecins Sans Frontières, they've helped a lot with, the refugee health, etc. In this particular area, I don't think any politicians have been in the way of NGOs achieving their goals. I'm talking more about to find the solution for the economic and political and the struggles that we're dealing and the financial struggles that we've been dealing with. I think the COVID pandemic that has happened recently and the consequences of the COVID pandemic have really unveiled true public health crisis in Lebanon and showed that the infrastructure of the government is really weak. I mean, you have in Lebanon some of the state-of-the-art hospitals. For example, my hospital is really very advanced in terms of technology. Half of its staff is American board certified. You have all the latest technologies, advances in treatment, transplantation, chemotherapy, all of that. And next door, you have a governmental hospital, for example, that is, very under-resourced, etc. So it's a country of contrast, and a lot of people who have been able to succeed have succeeded, I would say, despite the lack of support of the nation and the government. It's mostly always a personal effort, whether an institutional person effort or an individual personal effort to achieve something.
Mm-hmm. Well, all the more credit to you for achieving what you do. And maybe that can be a nice bridge to the final topic that I would like to discuss with you. And again, by the way, if you people back home have questions for the professor, you can ask them via Mentimeter. Just go to menti.com and use code 2785896. Is that the same code that I've been reading out loud? I think that's it. No, that's actually a different code from what I've been reading. Apologies for that. The proper code should be on screen and in the description of the YouTube video. And the final topic I'd like to discuss is the career perspectives of women in medical science. You are a woman. Do you feel that there are many women in your profession in Lebanon or in general?
Yes, in Lebanon, there are many women in medicine. Actually, now in for example, medical school class, more than 50% of the class are women. So more and more women have become interested in medicine. But if you ask me if there are a lot of women in leadership roles, the answer would be there are a few. So a lot of women are doing medicine, seeking medical education, but I would say very few reach to the top in terms of leadership positions.
All right. And what is your opinion on that? Do you think that should increase?
No, of course it should increase. But, although people talk a lot about discrimination against women, I think women need to prove themselves. At least if I think back about my personal career, I didn't feel personally initially when I was in the U.S. that I was discriminated against because of my gender. And when I returned back home, initially there was, you feel that I wouldn't use the term discrimination, but you feel that your male colleagues perceive you sometimes as a threat. But if you prove yourself and compete for positions with the same enthusiasm, with the same, determination, I think women can reach. And I can say throughout my career, I have proved to myself and to the other that if you are firm and you blow your own horn at many occasions to prove that you're there, you give your opinion in an objective way, etc., people will value this. So I think women can definitely reach leadership positions, and I encourage them to do so.
And so you have reached a leadership position, not just in an intellectual sense, but also in a very real managerial sense, because you're the head of the department. So is that something that you saw yourself doing as you came back to Lebanon, or how did you grow into that?
I actually, I think I would say I came back to Lebanon very well equipped with what it takes to lead, because even when I finished my training at Duke University, I very rapidly felt that I'm ready to develop my leadership skills. So, for example, when I finished my training at Duke University, I went to my chief and I said, I'd like to stay on faculty, but I'm thinking I want to start a new program because I don't want to do something that everybody else is doing. How about we start a transplant program, something that Duke University did not have at the time? That was in 1994. And so the chief initially said, well, do you think you have what it takes to lead this program? And I said, give me 6 months and I'll prove to you that it does work. And so basically this is what happened. And, for 2.5 years, I ran this program, which is now one of the most successful ID transplant program in the U.S., and they wrote about it in the history of Duke Infectious Diseases, and they're very proud of it. And so when I came back, I had already this experience to lead, and I became interested because I felt that with the department or division growing, and I wanted to push that to become more academic, more evidence-based practices. And I thought it would be difficult to achieve if I'm not leading those efforts. And so I was interested, and I think the chair of the department saw that as definitely feasible, and he gave me a chance, and I think I proved that I was the right person for the job. And then a few years later, I was appointed as chair of the infection control program at the same time. So now I'm leading both programs at the same time.
And do you think women who get an education in the medical field in Lebanon, so who don't have the experiences that you had in America, get the same chances to take up leadership roles? Is there a difference between America and Lebanon in that regard?
I think, at least at the American University of Beirut, for you to be asked to lead a program, you need to have some credentials, and if you have a board certification, etc., this is, I think, a minimum required to be put in a leadership position. But I must say, I'm not, the only female professor in the department. We have other female professors in the department, quite successful. Some of them have, been leading smaller programs, but most of them have trained, abroad, mostly in the U.S., and have credentials to allow them to lead and to advance academically. If you have someone who has trained locally in Lebanon, I think now with the rules of the American University of Beirut, I don't think you get a chance to lead a department or a division if you are locally trained. They require to have that additional external training.
Of course, that is not a gender-based requirement. But do you feel that more men than women, for example, go abroad to get leadership experience, or is that? Yeah.
Not anymore. I think now we have as many we have as many female or women student and doctor going to train in the U.S. Lebanon is a very liberal country, and we have no rules about, female not able to travel alone, etc., which is the case in some other Arab countries. So, no, I would say it's 50-50. A lot of women students are now seeking training in the U.S. My own daughter is doing her medical residency training in the U.S. now. So we encourage definitely training abroad so that they gain the experience and come back to Lebanon equipped with, better credentials, if you want.
You mentioned something that connects to one of the questions that came in from the audience, which is whether religious beliefs influence women's careers in Lebanon much, either from the perspective of the woman or from, general religious practices. You said it's a very liberal country, so I would assume not so much, maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. This is an important question. No, really, not at all. I think Lebanon, I don't know if the audience are aware of that. This is a country that has 18 different religions that live really together. They marry within the various religions. And it's very unusual not to have in the same household people from different religions. And no, I don't see religion playing at all a role for or against women training in medicine. On the contrary, medicine is looked at as one of the most secure in terms of future, secure financially profession. And I see more and more people are interested in seeking medical education. But no, I don't think religion plays a role at all. It could play a role in some other countries where, they don't like for female doctors examining, male patients, etc. But in Lebanon, it's not a consideration at all.
Okay, thank you very much. There are some more questions from the audience. They connect to various topics that we've discussed over the evening. So this is going to get a bit, off topic.
No problem.
This one harkens back to the antimicrobial or microbial resistance. So the question is whether war and conflict have an impact on antimicrobial resistance. So, for example, these physicians giving care in refugee camps or doctors giving care in war situations. Is that something that spurs on antimicrobial resistance, or yes. is their practice changed by this development?
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Frank. A very important question. So war and conflict definitely play a role in antimicrobial resistance. I tell you, some of the toughest bacteria that we have to deal with are bacteria that we isolate from patients coming from casualties from Syria or from Iraq. Why is that? Many reasons. For example, if I take the situation in Syria, they're using very poor generic antibiotics that are not as effective. They're locally made, and so they don't kill the bacteria. They inhibit the growth and allow the bacteria to cause resistance. They don't have any infection control practices. So, for example, in my hospital, if someone has resistant bacteria, we put them on some isolation so that before you go examining them, you wear gloves and gown, etc. This is non-existent in many hospitals in Syria. And so also the third factor is that there is some evidence suggesting that somehow some bacteria tend to thrive in war zones. And one of the examples is the bacterium Acinetobacter, which has been given the name Iraqi bacter. And so for all these reasons, yes, absolutely, in areas of wars and conflict, we see the problem of antimicrobial resistance much more exaggerated. There was a recent editorial in The Lancet where they called the antimicrobial resistance in the Middle East as a perfect storm, because they feel that war and conflict provide all the ingredients for the bacteria to develop resistance.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Sounds like a very important topic indeed, and one that is very relevant to your situation at the moment as well.
Yeah.
Another question on a different topic. You talked about the One Health approach for tackling the issue of antimicrobial resistance. The question from the audience here is, so the idea is that many different parties will work together in approaching this on a global scale and looking at it not just from a human perspective, but also from agriculture perspective and a veterinarian perspective. The question then is, how do you think that all of these various actors can really come to a consensus on this issue? Because it appears that there are many different interests that these actors, represent.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why it has been tough to control that. Because, for example, antibiotics have been shown to be growth promoters. So if you feed chickens some types of antibiotic, they go faster, and therefore the farmers will make more profit, etc. I think what needs to be done is to put all these people at the same table and try to say, okay, we acknowledge that you need to feed, for example, your animals some antibiotics, but how about we feed them the antibiotics that are not used at all for human medicine, etc. Same thing for the environment. So, for example, in the Netherlands, you have a problem of some fungi resistant to some of the common antifungal agents that we use to treat patients. And this is partly due to the fact that we use fungicidal products on the tulips and some of the agriculture, for example, to prevent the plants from being damaged. So we need to put them at the same table to say, okay, we know you should use some sorts of fungicidal or drugs that kills fungi on the plant, but how about we use some that are not essential to treat our patients? So I think there should be some compromise to try to acknowledge what each category, agriculture, farm, veterinary, environmental, and human, what are the needs and what are the compromises that can be done to try to minimize as much as possible the problem of resistance.
Excellent. So collaborate and educate and
yes.
Yeah, excellent. Unfortunately, with that, we have come to the end of tonight's program because that is all we have time for. Professor, thank you very much for being with us. It has been an honor, and I wish you a very merry day tomorrow when you are presented with the honorary doctorate by the Radboud University.
Thank you very much, Frank. I'm sorry. The honor was truly mine, and I look forward to tomorrow. And again, it's a pleasure and an honor to be a member of the Radboud family now. As you see, I wore red today because this is the color of your kappa.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Frank. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
And to everybody watching, thank you for watching this Radboud Reflects live stream. Do keep an eye on the website, ru.nl, it's been a while, ru.nl/Radboud Reflects for all the upcoming programs, which can either be live streams or uploaded directly to YouTube. And there's also a podcast channel. So do follow us on wherever you get your media. And hopefully we'll see you at the next program. Have a good evening.